Hello, I hope everybody had a good weekend. I'm glad you can join me now for this daily devotional that we have together. Today I want to talk about the Beatitudes, and the first part of the Beatitudes is what I'll be talking about today, being poor in spirit. Today's Bible readings will come from the King James Version of the Bible, and it is in Matthew 5 verse 3 that Jesus begins his sermon with the Beatitudes by saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now we may ask ourselves, what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Being poor in spirit means that we have come to realize that we are helpless, that we are powerless on our own. We've come to realize that we have a problem with sin, and we do not have the solution. We cannot cure ourselves of sin without the blood of Christ. And when I think of being poor in spirit, I think of the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, the parable that we find in Luke chapter 18, verses 10 through 14. It's there that we read that two men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, "God, I thank thee, that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess." And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For every one that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. See, being poor in spirit means that we humble ourselves and realize that we are to be in submission to the Lord. And instead of realizing that we have all the answers, we realize that we don't have all the answers, and that we're in need of hope, that we're in need of God's mercy and His grace if we're to have salvation. Being poor in spirit means that we're willing to give up all for Christ. Paul spoke of this in Philippians 3 verse 8 as he writes, "I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and to count them but dung, that I may win Christ." Paul was an influential Jew. He was influential and important in the Jewish faith, but he was willing to leave that behind for Christ. We must be willing to leave behind the things of this world for Christ. That indeed is being poor in spirit. To be poor in spirit means that we're willing to give up self and to take up our cross and follow Jesus. Jesus himself says in Matthew 16, verses 24 and 25, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it." When we take up our cross to follow Jesus, we're taking up our cross saying that, if necessary, we're willing to die to be his follower. But even in more than a physical sense, we're saying that in a spiritual sense, that we're putting to death ourselves, that we're putting to death our desires and our lust to follow after him. When we look at the life of Jesus, yes, he was King of Kings and he was Lord of Lords, but he was also a servant. And if we're to be followers of his, we must have an attitude of servitude as well. And so let us have that attitude. Let us be poor in spirit. Let us remember that the Lord does reward those who humble themselves to remove self from their lives in order to do his will. If we'll do that, we'll have his great reward. I thank you for watching today, and I hope you'll continue to watch. And I hope you'll join us for worship services at the Bearden Church of Christ. We meet at 745 Cedar Street in Bearden. We meet at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning for Bible study, at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. for worship services, and we meet Wednesday night at 6:30 for midweek Bible study. I hope you can come join us. Once again, thank you for watching today. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.